I only understood the true price of my father's silence when Brenda, my stepmother, stood over his mahogany casket and hissed that I didn't belong here. The air in the Phoenix funeral parlor was thick with cheap cologne and forced sympathy. I was the only child, the 23-year-old remnant of my dad's first honest life, and Brenda saw me as nothing more than a legal liability. Dad, David, had been dead 5 days, a sudden catastrophic heart attack 10 miles every morning. Brenda, draped in designer black that probably cost more than my first car, leaned in close enough for me to smell the stale cigarette smoke clinging to her hair. "You're done, Sarah. Your father left no provision for you," she whispered, her eyes narrow and cold. "Don't bother coming back to the house. It's mine now. You have your grief, keep it to yourself, and leave the property alone." The audacity stole the air from my lungs. At the closed casket where my strong, quiet father lay, eternally shielded from this woman's venom. Dad and I had always been close, even after he married Brenda 8 years ago. But over the last 6 months, a thick, suffocating wall had grown between us, built brick by Brenda's constant surveillance and David's terrifying new paranoia. I remembered the last time I saw him alive, 2 weeks before the supposed heart attack. Not his usual spot. We met at a greasy diner. And he looked like a ghost. He kept scanning the windows, fiddling with the car keys in his pocket. He barely touched his coffee. "Are you okay, Dad? You look terrified," I'd asked, genuinely frightened. He reached across the sticky table and squeezed my hand, his grip crushing. "Listen to me, Sarah. If anything happens to me, anything sudden, understand? Don't trust the story. The key I gave you. Don't trust the tackle box inside. Go to the old shed. Remember the silver padlock is broken, but that's the code." I barely had time to process the cryptic warning before Brenda called his cell, demanding he return immediately. He snatched his hand away, fear flashing in his eyes, and rushed out, leaving the check and my questions unanswered. The key he'd mentioned? It was a tiny brass novelty key, attached to a cheap souvenir keychain he'd given me years ago, home, sitting in my jewelry box. I thought nothing of it until now. Back in the funeral parlor, I tried to keep my composure as Brenda continued her tirade, drawing the uncomfortable attention of the few distant relatives present. "He finally realized you were just a drain on his finances, Sarah," she sneered. "You don't belong here." I opened my mouth to fight back, to tell her exactly where she could shove her condolences and her veiled threats, when a sudden jarring sound cut through thud, thud, thud. The heavy, rhythmic sound of massive boots on marble floor. Every head snapped toward the entrance. Even Brenda, whose arrogance usually shielded her from external reality, froze mid-smirk. Standing framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was a man who looked like he'd ridden straight out of a movie about motorcycle gangs. He was immense, easily 6'5", screaming dressed head to toe in black leather, specifically the Mesa chapter. A thick silver chain hung low from his jeans, and his beard was braided, silver threading through the dark hair. He wore mirrored sunglasses, so you couldn't read his eyes, but his posture radiated cold, unwavering menace. He marched straight through the mourners, who parted like the Red Sea. He didn't offer a nod or a word of condolence to anyone. That led him directly toward the casket and toward Brenda. Purpose. Brenda, completely unnerved, finally found her voice. "Excuse me, sir. This is a private service. Who are you?" The biker stopped 6 feet away, his shadow engulfing her, making her look small and fragile for the first time in her life. He pulled off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were shockingly pale blue and hard as ice. "My name is Jax. David was my brother." That silenced the entire room, his voice a low, gravelly blood relation. I knew instantly. He meant brotherhood under the patch. Brenda scoffed, recovering slightly. "David didn't have a brother like you. He was a respectable businessman. You need to leave." Jax didn't look at her. He looked at my father's casket, a flicker of genuine grief crossing his face. Then, his pale gaze swung toward me, studying me intensely. He hadn't said a word to me, but I felt a powerful, protective. He turned back to Brenda, his expression darkening. "David may have been a respectable businessman, but he used to ride with us back in the early 90s, before he met the first honest woman he ever loved, Sarah's mother. We lost touch when he cleaned up his act, but we never broke the oath." He took one deliberate step closer to Brenda, forcing her to lean back slightly. I know what David was planning.
No, you tried to stop it.
Jack stated.
He told me
his
3
voice
months
gaining
ago
volume.
that if he died suddenly, it wouldn't be natural. He told me to keep an eye on his little girl, Sarah. Brenda's composure cracked. Her face went white beneath the heavy makeup. That's insane. He had a heart condition.
Did he? Jax challenged, his eyes burning into hers. Or did you make sure the doctor overlooked things? The room dissolved into a collective gasp. I felt lightheaded.
Paranoia,
the pieces of the puzzle, the cryptic key, the sudden death, slamming together with sickening force. Jack straightened up, addressing the room, but his message was meant for Brenda alone. David had an appointment scheduled next week. He was going to revoke the power of attorney he'd granted. He was planning to take back everything you manipulated him into signing, including the deed to the property and the business insurance policies. And he was going to tell Sarah everything. Brenda stumbled backward, hitting a decorative pillar. Lies, slander, I'll call the police. Jax just chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You won't call anyone, because I know you don't want people digging into the financials of his company over the last 3 years, and I know you don't want people digging into the prescription bottles you kept in the bedside drawer. He finally looked directly at me, Sarah, the forgotten daughter. Your father was trying to protect you. He gave me a note with a final instruction. Go find the silver trout lure, Sarah. Go home and find the truth he hid for you. And when you find it, you bring it straight to me. Don't tell anyone, especially not her. He jerked his chin toward Brenda, who was now quietly hyperventilating. With that, Jax nodded once, a gesture of respect toward the casket, put his sunglasses back on, and strode out of the parlor, leaving a vacuum of silence in his wake. I didn't wait around for Brenda to regain her footing. The game. I fled the funeral home. The image of Jax's cold eyes and my father's fearful face burned into my mind. I drove straight back to Dad's house. Our house, the one Brenda claimed was hers, ignoring the gnawing fear that she might already be there, shredding evidence. The house was empty. Brenda was still dealing with the fallout at the funeral home, probably trying to convince the relatives that Jax... I raced upstairs to my old bedroom, digging through my childhood jewelry box until my fingers closed around the cold brass of the novelty key. The old shed was behind the garage, rarely used since Dad retired from fishing years ago. Just as he'd said, the flimsy latch was broken. Inside, the air was musty, smelling of rust, dried leaves, and old gasoline. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, green metal tackle box, the one Dad used every summer until Brenda convinced him fishing was beneath his status. My hands were shaking violently as I fitted the small brass key into the lock. It clicked open easily. Inside, resting on a bed of tangled fishing line and rusty hooks, was the silver trout lure. It was a cheap plastic thing, but it represented everything my father had tried to tell me. I picked it up, expecting to find a hidden compartment, microchip. No. The lure was simply resting on top of a small, heavily taped manila envelope. I tore the tape off, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't find a will or a confession letter. I found 3 things. First, a stack of recent medical records, handwritten notes scribbled in the margins, all detailing David's perfect health. Underneath the official diagnosis of cardiac arrest, some obscure life insurance policy worth millions, scrawled a single naming word, Brenda as the sole beneficiary, finalized exactly 4 weeks ago. Third, the item that made my knees buckle and sent a wave of icy shock through my body. A single high-resolution photograph. It wasn't a picture of Brenda or me. It was a picture of a safety deposit box receipt, perfectly centered, but covering the name field on the receipt was a second photo, taped delicately over the first. Not looking malicious, it was a candid shot of Brenda, a genuine, carefree laugh, and pressed close against her, their arms linked, was a man I had never seen before. A man who looked eerily like the young doctor who had signed my father's death certificate. I only realized Brenda was wrong about everything. Wrong about the money, wrong about the death, wrong about her control, when I saw the photo my father had left hidden. It wasn't the proof of a heartbroken husband trying to fight it was the proof that Brenda wasn't just greedy. She was a murderer working with a partner, and my father knew it. He had staged the elaborate trout lure sequence not for a legal battle, but for a guaranteed path to justice. Now, I had to get this to Jax before Brenda realized the last piece of my father's honesty was still missing. The slick, glossy paper of the photograph felt like a burning coal in my palm. It wasn't a casual snapshot. It was a clear shot of Brenda shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, standing in front of a small, unmarked warehouse near the Miami shipping docks, a place Dad had zero legitimate business being. The date stamp was 3 days before the accident in Scottsdale. My father hadn't just suspected a legal loophole. He had known the mechanism of his own demise, and he'd built an exit strategy, a failsafe, banking on my paranoia to find the truth he couldn't openly declare. Shoved the photo deep into the lining of my worn leather satchel, the same one Dad had given me when I started college, now smelling faintly of old books and desperation. Every shadow outside the study door seemed to hold Brenda's cold, evaluating gaze. Her behavior over the last 48 hours had been unnervingly flawless. Most widows look undone, ravaged by grief, or at least strategically pale. Not condolences Brenda. With the controlled grace of a CEO closing a hostile endless stream of... She spoke often of Dad's sudden and unfortunate departure, always using the word departure, never death, as if he'd simply stepped out for a lengthy lunch. She was constantly hovering near the safe, near Dad's desk, near me. "Are you certain you don't need anything, Amelia?" She'd purr, leaning against the doorframe of my temporary room, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Perhaps a sedative?" "You look... This house is so full of memories, isn't it? Painful ones." I knew she wasn't offering comfort. She was searching. She was calculating what Dad might have left behind and assessing my emotional volatility. She needed me compliant, quiet, and preferably sedated until the will was read. I played the role of the shell-shocked heiress perfectly, withdrawn, red-eyed, incapable of coherent constructing the message I needed to send Jax. But underneath the facade, my mind was running a phone call. Brenda had likely tapped the entire estate. I needed a burner, but leaving the property was too dangerous. My father's instructions had been clear, written in the marginalia of his favorite fishing manual. If the line breaks, use the old frequency. The old frequency was a local obscure ham radio channel we used to mess around with when I was a kid. It was archaic, almost impossible to trace unless you knew the exact coordinates. I waited until 3 a.m., the dead hour when even Scottsdale's high-security systems seemed to sigh into slumber. I crept down to the basement where Dad kept his dusty amateur radio rig, a relic of the Cold War. My fingers trembled as I typed the code. Trout, hooked, reel, fast. I didn't wait for confirmation. All I could do now was wait for Jax to receive the signal and pray he understood the urgency, heart pounding against my ribs. The next few hours were like a trapped bird. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, sounded like footsteps approaching my door. By 8 a.m. the house was stirring. Brenda was already downstairs, talking animatedly to the estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man with the smooth, unctuous demeanor of polished marble. Then my burner phone, a cheap satchel months ago flip phone I'd hidden in the lining, vibrated. One text message, 1600, Papago Park Lookout. Bring the catch. Papago Park. Public, open, and impossible to surveil completely without drawing attention. It was perfect. I spent the day meticulously preparing. I backed up the photo onto a secure cloud drive Dad had shown me, then printed 2 copies, sealing one in a waterproof plastic bag, and taping it under the rim of the toilet tank. The original photo remained tucked inside the satchel, the evidence, a constant sharp weight against my hip. At 3:45 p.m., I told Brenda I needed air, that the oppressive quiet of the house was suffocating me. "Of course, dear," she said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "Be careful. Scottsdale traffic is dreadful this time of day." As I pulled my car out of the driveway, I checked the rearview mirror. Against the afternoon sun, Brenda was standing on the porch. I didn't accelerate until I was 3 blocks away, merging into the flow of traffic, trying to look like a woman simply overwhelmed by loss. Papago Park was bustling with hikers and sightseers. I parked near the zoo entrance and walked towards the lookout point, keeping my head down, scanning the faces. I saw Jax instantly. He was leaning against the stone railing, his large frame obscured by sunglasses and a baseball cap, looking completely inconspicuous, a tourist waiting for a bus. As I approached, a wave of relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me weak.
I had done it. The proof was safe. Justice was within reach. "Jax," I murmured, reaching into the satchel. He turned and his gaze was laser-focused. Not on me, but on the bag. "Amelia, you shouldn't have come alone. This is dangerous territory." "Fighting a murderer." "But I have it." I pulled out the photograph. Before I could hand it to him,
just fighting
Jax's eyes flickered past my shoulder, widening slightly. His hand shot up, not to take the photo, but to push me violently against the stone railing. "Get down!" he hissed, his voice raw. I gasped, dropping the satchel. It hit the dirt. My head snapped around, following his line of sight, and the world tilted sickeningly. The man in the photograph, the one shaking Brenda's hand in front of the... He was here. He wasn't alone. He was standing 20 feet away, partially hidden by a cluster of saguaros, speaking urgently into a cell phone. And standing right beside him, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer, hands resting calmly in his pockets, observing the entire scene with a predatory smirk that erased any memory of polite marble, was Mr. Henderson, was Brenda, the estate lawyer, hired muscle, my vision the very man legally responsible for executing my father's will. They hadn't just killed Dad, they had infiltrated the final stages of his life, ensuring they controlled the entire aftermath. The staged trout lure sequence, the photo, the frantic communication with Jax, it had all been watched. This meeting wasn't a handover, it was a trap, and I had led the only person who could help me straight into it. Whispered, they knew the realization sucking the air from my lungs. Brenda's surveillance wasn't just the house, it was Jax too. Jax didn't answer. He was already moving, pushing me towards a cluster of low-hanging rocks. "They didn't see the photo yet. Run, Amelia, go." But as Jax drew his weapon, a heavy, silencing weight hit the back of his head. He crumpled without a sound, his body sliding down the dusty slope. I watched, frozen calmly over Jax's downed body, as Mr. Henderson walked, never taking his eyes off me. The other man, the one from the photo, retrieved the satchel. He pulled out the photograph, examined it quickly, and then looked back at Henderson, giving a sharp, satisfied nod. "Well, Amelia?" Henderson's voice echoed across the open space, perfectly measured and devoid of anger. "It seems your father was more thorough than we anticipated. Such a shame you inherited his persistence. My life was now firmly in the hands of my father's killers, and I had one choice: run or die where I stood. I chose the former, scrambling over the sharp rocks, abandoning everything but the terrifying knowledge that they knew exactly where to find me next. The game wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about survival, and I was losing rapidly. I didn't stop running until the agonizing stitch in my side made me stumble onto the desolate cracked. The air tasted of rust and defeat. I had sacrificed everything, my security, my inheritance, and the only proof that could avenge my father, just for the primal chance to draw another breath. The vast, empty landscape of upstate New York blurred around me. I was a ghost, fleeing a predator, with nothing but the clothes on my back, and the terrifying certainty that they knew the game was still on. Trucker heading southwest. I traded my last $80 in silence for 3 days of cramped anonymity inside the cab, the relentless drone of the engine washing away the constant ringing in my ears. I ended up in Denton, Texas, a place far enough from the power structures of Boston and New York to feel temporarily safe. I found sanctuary in a mildew-scented motel room off an exit ramp, the kind of place where people only stop when they have nowhere else to go. Week was a chemical fog of sheer terror. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep without dreaming of being cornered back on those jagged cliffs, hearing Elias's smug voice telling me what a disappointment I was. Every knock on the adjacent room's door, every unfamiliar vehicle pulling into the parking lot, sent spikes of adrenaline through my body. My reflection was unrecognizable, hollow-eyed, skin stretched tight over bone. Truth. The haunted shell of the daughter who had dared to see, the hard drive, the encrypted files, but they hadn't taken the memory of what I saw. The financial ledgers, the coded communication, the clear, undeniable trail leading straight to their conspiracy and my father's execution. That knowledge was still mine, and that knowledge was the true threat. Survival meant moving beyond hiding,
It meant rebuilding the case from the ground up, starting with zero trust and absolute paranoia. Using a burner phone purchased with coins from a vending machine. The number belonged to Marcus Thorne. Marcus was Dad's former head of security, a man who had vanished quietly after the accident, claiming early retirement due to a vague illness. I knew better. Marcus carried the weight of my father's death like a shroud. He didn't ask where I was or why I sounded like a dying animal. He only said, "Send me a coordinate." Days later, Marcus arrived in a rented sedan, his face heavier, his movements slower, but the steel in his gaze was exactly as I remembered. He sat across from me in the cramped motel room, sipping bad coffee. "They took the primary payload," I whispered, the shame of the failure burning in my throat. "The proof is gone. They have it." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Your father was a paranoid visionary kid. He always operated on 3 levels of, we need the real one." "The real payload," Marcus explained, "wasn't meant to be discovered accidentally in a safe deposit box. It was digital, buried deep within a private cloud server the family corporation had maintained for decades, disguised merely as an archive of historical stock market data. The encryption key wasn't a password, it was embedded in an antique Patek Philippe wristwatch my father had given me on my 21st birthday, strapped to my wrist even as I scrambled over those rocks because it was the last thing I had of him. They had searched my bag, my car, my immediate person, but never thought to check the sentimental timepiece. We spent the next 6 weeks operating out of a dark, windowless storage unit in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Marcus, a ghost from my father's past, and I, a ghost of the present, meticulously reconstructed the evidence. Financial manipulation, gigabytes time-stamped emails detailing the conspiracy, and audio recordings. The true uncut story of how Elias and Vincent had coordinated with high-ranking officials to liquidate my father's holdings and silence him permanently. This time, we didn't keep a single copy in one place. The evidence was encrypted, segmented, and simultaneously transmitted to 3 separate independent legal teams across the country, far outside the sphere of influence of the men. The arrests were not the dramatic cinematic confrontation I had envisioned in my revenge fantasies. They were quiet, bureaucratic, and shockingly mundane. Elias was taken into custody during his morning squash game in Manhattan. Vincent was pulled from a charity board meeting in Connecticut. I watched the news reports from a nondescript apartment in Seattle, the shaky camera footage confirming their stunned, pale faces. Reign of corporate terror. The sudden, violent end. The trials took 18 months. I testified remotely, my voice flat, measured, recounting the terror without the raw emotion that had defined those early weeks. Elias and Vincent received consecutive life sentences without parole. The legal victory was complete, absolute. But the victory didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like the sudden, deafening silence after an explosion. I sold the family assets, changed my name, I started therapy, and moved permanently to... Learning that the adrenaline high of survival eventually dissipates, leaving behind profound, exhausting grief and a persistent, low-grade paranoia. I still check the locks multiple times. I jump at unexpected sounds. The long shadow of their persistence and my father's obsessive preparation had defined my life, but now I had to define myself without the fight. Infuriating, stubborn refusal because I inherited more than just a fortune, irrefutable proof. I inherited his insistence on building walls within walls. He prepared for the worst betrayal imaginable, and in the end, that foresight saved his daughter. To anyone listening who feels trapped, exposed, or cornered, they can steal your tangible proof. They can strip you of your possessions, but they cannot steal the knowledge residing in your mind, through your veins, nor the persistence that courses. Find your Marcus. Find your hidden watch. The fight is never truly over until you decide to put down the burden, not the weapon. Justice doesn't always roar like the wind on a cliff face. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of handcuffs on a Tuesday morning. And after everything, I learned that quiet is enough. It is finally, irrevocably enough.